I awoke in a cold sweat. After throwing my soaked bedsheets aside, I rose from my bed, knowing I wouldn't sleep again after my most recent nightmare. I don't consider myself frightened easily by them, especially since I have an odd knack of knowing when I am in a dream. But this time it was different. The dream began with me standing in a dimly lit residential street, one I recognized, but could not remember from where or when. The scene was devoid of any color, save the dark orange glow of the street lamps that littered the road. As I walked, I wondered just where I was and how I got there, as I had neither my wallet or phone on my person. At a small road turn-off, I stopped on a street corner to look around and get my bearings. Abruptly, one of the street lamps far off, to my right down the street, flickered and shattered. I was quite alarmed at this point, because earlier there was only silence, and then more lamps shattered around me, left and right, until the only one left on was the one hanging above me. I could feel my heart beating and I backed nearer to the only source of light until I was tightly gripping the cold metal behind my back. In the distance, I could hear footsteps moving towards me from directly in front of me, and then more from the pathways left and right from me. It was pitch black all around me, besides the dim lamp showering above my head, and a part of me knew I was probably in more danger under the lamp than outside in the dark, but I didn't care. The footsteps grew closer and louder, and then I finally saw something enter my protective light dome. At the edge of the lamp's reach something stood into the light, so I could only see its legs up to the knee. They were black and coarse, almost as if they were made out of ash. Around me, 4 or 5 of the creatures entered too, each looking identical to the first. I sunk down along the lamp post until I made contact with the ground, still keeping my hands clasped to it. The initial creature was standing right in front of me, and then took another step. Its movement was rigid and slow, and before I saw its face, I closed my eyes, a secret I often used to wake up from bad dreams, and shut them tight. After a few seconds, I opened them, expecting to be back to reality. Instead, I saw the creature face to face to me, kneeling down, staring directly into my eyes. It was fully black, and had a slender human shape, but with no discernible features besides its cold, sunken eye sockets. Paralyzed with fear, I stared back at his face until I noticed the rest of his group began to kneel down and stare at me too. I watched on in horror as they all looked at me under the lamp. They all whispered something, barely inaudible, in unison.
12:37.
I slumped to the floor, suddenly exhausted, and the first creature followed my gaze as I passed out. Back in reality, I had got to my feet and was on my way to get a glass of water before I figured out what to do with the rest of my night. I turned on the light in my hallway and headed downstairs to my kitchen. After a few sips, I noticed the time on the oven timer. 12:37. I laughed about the coincidence, until I heard the light shatter from upstairs.
Tap tap. Tap tap. Do not do it. Do not give it the satisfaction. Tap tap. Tap tap. I had to force myself not to turn around and look at my window. The constant tapping was dwindling down, and I could almost hear the frustration of the creature. At first I thought it must have been a tree branch. But a tree branch does not stand 4 feet tall and have it out for me. I focused in on my computer screen, trying to block out the sound. I checked the time. It was 3:24 a.m. 6 more minutes. 6 more minutes and you are free, I told myself. The minutes dragged on, slowly inching toward 3:30 a.m. Right on cue, the tapping ceased at exactly 3:30 a.m. I sighed and turned around to finally crash on top of my bed and get what little sleep I could. That was when I saw it. It pressed its stubby face against my window. I sat frozen in fear, unsure of what to do. It just stared at me, unblinking and unmoving. I shook in both terror and uncertainty. It began to tilt its head like a confused dog, still unblinking. A couple of minutes passed, and it still had not blinked once. Now that my lamp illuminated its face, I had a good look at it. It was tiny, almost the size of a small child. Its size seemed unnatural to its body, too big and bulky. It had a permanent smile. Its rotten, jagged teeth pressed up against my window. Its bony finger tapped on the window, creating a sick rhythm. Tap tap. Tap tap. Eventually, the sun began to rise behind the tree line. The rays of light struck my window and the creature. It twisted its head around to investigate the source and then turned back at me. It smiled at me one last time and vanished into the woods. Exhausted and terrified, I lay down in bed to catch the last hour of sleep I could. The next night I prepared myself for tapping. However, it never happened. I drew the blinds, turned off the light, and lay down for a hopefully peaceful sleep. After a few moments, the tapping was heard. Not tapping on glass, no. A deeper tap. It was the sound of finger on wood, and it was from across the room. It was from my closet.